To go? Well, then here we go. It is Tuesday night, time for Second Look, where we look backward a second time at what we did on Sunday, and this time we are in Acts chapter 14. So if you are joining us online, we welcome you. We have a company here in person, but we welcome you online, ladies and gentlemen, and all the ships at sea. So turn to Acts 14. Unfortunately, wherever you are, if it's not here, you don't have a study guide, but we do. So get yourself one, and we'll work ahead on some verses and things. We're doing speeches. The speech in this portion of the book of Acts 14 is a brief speech, shorter than some of the others we've looked at, especially like Acts 17 and some of the others, Acts 15. But here in 14, short speech. But really what's fascinating is the story around the little speech. So let's just read the entire thing. We didn't even do this on Sunday. I've got the New American Standard in front of me. Let me quickly read it, starting at verse 1, and we will go down through, I think we'll stop at 23, I think. In Iconium, they entered the synagogue, they being Paul and Barnabas at least, and maybe others in their entourage. In Iconium, this is a city, a Roman colony city in modern-day Turkey, what they then called Asia Minor, Little Asia. Big Asia was like Pakistan and India. This is Little Asia, and we're going to see that it's got some overlapping names. Iconium was one of the cities. They entered the synagogue of the Jews. It was probably a city of some size if it had a synagogue of diaspora Jews, Jews that have left the Middle East, left Israel, and have settled there for business reasons, other reasons. So they've got a synagogue, which means you have at least 10 men, 10 Jewish men. That would be at least 10 Jewish families. So already you're talking a sizable group, and it's certainly more than 10. So they go into the synagogue of the Jews together, and they spoke in such a manner that a large number of people believed, both Jews and Greeks. So it tells us that this synagogue was open to non-Jews. There were people in it that would have been classified as proselytes. That's people that have gone and converted all the way, subscribed to all the dietary laws, and if it was gentlemen, circumcision, so quite a commitment. There would also have been what were called God-fearers. Those are non-Jews that are fellow travelers. They don't embrace everything, but they're there. So it's a mixed synagogue, Jews and Greeks. We're going to come back to that phrase, very interesting phrase. But the Jews who disbelieved, not all of the Jewish people in the synagogue did, who disbelieved stirred up the minds of the Gentiles, the ethne, the non-Jews, people of the nations, and we're going to find out that it was probably a mixed bag of Romans and Greeks and natives and a lot of different things. Stirred up their minds and in fact embittered them against the brethren, Paul and Barnabas. Therefore they spent a long time there, almost an act of defiance. Okay, you're going to push us, we're going to stay. We were thinking about leaving, but we're going to stay. And so they stay for some length of time, indeterminate. They spent a long time there, speaking boldly with reliance upon the Lord, who was testifying to the word of his grace, and here's how, granting them signs and wonders to be done by their hands. So they become emboldened because of the pushback, but it goes a step further when God himself gets involved and signs are added. So the opposition now is becoming serious because they're getting more bold. But the people of the city were divided, and some sided with the Jews and some with the apostles. It's interesting that means that Barnabas is considered an apostle. Interesting, no? When an attempt was made by both the Gentiles, the non-Jews and the Jews, with their rulers, these are the ones who are disbelievers, to mistreat and to stone them. So apparently there's some kind of movement against Paul and Barnabas to try and apprehend them. We'd be perfectly in line with thinking it might have been some violence involved, but they get wind of it and they leave. There are some bad intentions. If you're talking stoning, that's some pretty bad intentions. So what it means is that the longer they have stayed, the longer it goes, the more people take sides, and those sides become solidified, for and against, and the opposition against them, it hardens and it gets bolder, because now we will kill you. That's what we will do now. 6, and they became aware of it. Good thing. And they fled to the cities of Lycaonia, Lystra, and Derbe. Now, Lycaonia is a region. Lystra and Derbe are 2 small cities further inland, and the surrounding region. And we're going to find out that surrounding region has got a lot of meaning for us. And there they continued to preach the gospel. At Lystra, one of the cities, a man was sitting who had no strength in his feet, lame from his mother's womb, who had never walked. And as we said Sunday, Dr. Luke, in his diagnosis, he says 3 different ways this guy is immobile. He had no strength in his feet, and we won't take time to look at it, but there's almost clinical words in there. Apparently this guy is not like some of the other lame people that we've seen where their legs were disfigured or they had not developed. This guy, apparently it's just the feet that aren't functional. So it says he had no strength in his feet, number 1. He was lame from his mother's womb, so it's congenital, and he had never walked. This man was listening to Paul. Now it seems that they're not in a synagogue setting. Maybe there's not enough Jewish people in this area to constitute a synagogue. And it's in a public space. It'd be a real worthwhile exercise sometime, next time you read through the book of Acts, to mark every time God does something significant in a public space. He does more in the public spaces than he does within the walls of the houses of worship. And I think that's probably a through line that we should think about too. What we do in here is important. What we do out there is more important and more significant. So anyway, it's in a public space. It seems to be outside somewhere. This man was listening to Paul as he spoke, who, when he had fixed his gaze on him and had seen that he had faith to be made well, said with a loud voice, "Stand up on your feet." And he, the man, leaped up and began to walk. When the crowd saw that what Paul had done, they raised their voice, saying in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have become like men and have come down to us." And they began calling Barnabas Zeus and Paul Hermes. As I think I said Sunday, Zeus is the king of the gods, of course, and maybe they see Barnabas as a Zeus figure because he's maybe more dignified. But Paul for sure is the spokesman. And so he is Hermes, who is a messenger god. In the Roman system, he's known as Mercury. And that's why he's got those wings on his feet, so he can take a message really quick. He's also the god of oratory and rhetoric, and so that fits Paul to a T in their thinking. So the gods have come down to us. Barnabas is Zeus. Paul is Hermes because he's the chief speaker. And the priest of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the city, and that's a significant detail on Luke's part. We'll see why in a minute. Brought oxen and garlands. It would have been a woven woolen kind of a collar that would have been stuck through with flowers and leaves and other bright decorations. It was a signifier that this is the sacrifice. So this priest, he's outside the city. He brings in an ox that's all garland to the gates, and he wanted to offer sacrifice with the crowds. The way the sentence is constructed in the original, it seems to imply that this priest may have brought the sacrificial ox, still alive, up to the gate, the house where Paul and Barnabas are staying. Now, I said on Sunday, they may have been a little slow on the uptake because they don't know this language. We already are told that they're crying out in the Lycaonian language. That's a native language. It's not Roman, it's not Greek, it's a native language to that area that predates all of that. And that's what they're talking in. and they may have had to use a translator. And so we've got a couple problems here. How did this crowd, these many God worshipers, how did they get the idea that Paul and Barnabas were open to the idea of many gods and that they were gods when part of the gospel is there's only one God? Well, it may be because the translator was poor. Another indicator that the translator may have been poor is it takes them a while to realize, oh my gosh, they're bringing this sacrifice for us. So what happens? So when the apostles Barnabas and Paul, and Barnabas is an apostle again, heard of it, they tore their robes, and you know that is a sign, a Jewish sign of extreme anguish, to rip your clothes. That is absolute horror. And they're horrified. What's going on here? This is rank blasphemy, paganism. Tore their robes, rushed out into the street, crying out, saying, "Men, why are you doing these things? We are also men, the same nature as you. And we preach the gospel to you, that you should turn from these vain things to a living God who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that's in them." It sounds a little bit like the way he presented things, will present things at the Areopagus when we talked about Acts 17. He goes back to Genesis and the creation story. He made heaven and earth and all the sea and all that's in them. In the generations gone by, he permitted all the nations to go their own ways. Again, an echo of what he'll say in Acts 17. In times of ignorance, you could be excused for doing some of this, but times of ignorance are past. Sounds a little bit like the same sort of thing. Even saying these things with difficulty, they restrained the crowds from offering sacrifices to them. Now here's the problem. The people that were disgruntled, the troublemakers back in Iconium, have now, after this incident, made their way to Lystra, where this has taken place. They managed to calm the crowd down. We don't need a sacrifice. They've declined it. But here come the troublemakers, and they're coming there to make trouble. They're chasing Paul and Barnabas down. We didn't get you stoned there, we're going to get you stoned here. And they stir up the crowd to the point that the crowd now goes from believing they're gods to believing they're devils. And we've got to eliminate them. They came from Antioch and Iconium, having won over the crowds, and they stoned Paul and dragged him out of the city. Barnabas somehow managed to not be stoned. It's like the old joke, if I'm being chased by a lion, I've just got to run faster than you, that's all. And that's apparently what Barnabas did. So they end up stoning Paul, supposing him to be dead, and while the disciples, those that they've led to Christ in this area, so they've been here a while, they've discipled some people who know what to do, they pray, stood around him, he got up and he entered the city. And the next day he went away with Barnabas to Derbe, which is another city a little further inland, a little further away from the coast. And after they had preached the gospel in that city and had made many disciples, great success, they returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, the scene of the crime. And it's thought that an interval of time had passed sufficient that the magistrates and the city officials that were presiding when all of this happened, the near riot in Iconium, the definite riot in Lystra, that those people are no longer in charge. And so maybe some magistrates that are more friendly to the gospel and to Paul and Barnabas are in charge. So they go back through the exact same places, strengthening the souls of the disciples, and you get a little look at how they plant churches, encouraging them to continue in the faith and saying through many tribulations we must enter the kingdom of God. And they appoint elders for them in every church. Having prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord in whom they had believed. So you get a little picture of church structure there. Well, let's just start with a little summary. The way I would summarize these events in this chapter is point out three things. So under the summary there, apostolic signs, the apostolic signs do not dissipate And they certainly don't disappear. Now, what kind of apostolic signs are we talking about? Let's look in Mark 16. Somebody turn there. Verses 17 and 18, Jesus talking. It's right before he ascends. He's risen from the grave. He's been with them a period of about 40 days. We don't know in that 40 days when he makes these statements, but certainly it seems toward the end. Again, before the ascension, he has this to say about how we should go about things and what we should anticipate and how we should present the gospel. 16 of Mark, 17 and 18. Who's got it? You got it, Dana? Go ahead.
These signs will accompany those who have believed. In my name they will cast out demons. They will speak with new tongues. They will pick up serpents, and if they drink any deadly poison, it will not harm them. They will lay hands on the sick, and they will recover.
This healing of the man in Lystra with the feet, it is the first recorded miracle at the hands of healing, rather, at the hands of Paul. There are kind of oblique references earlier, some of the other things he's done, that there were miracles around him, but nothing explicit. This is the first one that's a full-fledged, full-on healing at Paul's hands. And that's exactly in line with what Jesus says in Mark 16, that signs should follow. These signs will follow them that believe, okay? Of course, you know there are people, and I suppose they're sincere, but they say the age of miracles is over. God doesn't do that anymore. That was a different dispensation, different time, different age. God doesn't do that. Miracles have ceased. Tongues have ceased, etc., etc. There's no indication from what Jesus says in 16 that he anticipated a ceasing, because he's sending out, and carte blanche statement is, these signs will follow them that believe. Not these signs will follow them that believe until the apostles die, but these signs will follow them that believe. Do we believe? Yes, then these signs should follow. We should anticipate these things because they are indicators. The word sign means attesting miracle. It's something that attests to the miraculous hand of God is present. So, apostolic signs, this is kind of a summary of this chapter. It shows that apostolic signs don't dissipate, and they haven't disappeared at this point. This is a few years now, probably around, you're getting close to 20 years after Jesus' ascension. So 20 years out, actually it's probably more than that, because if we put the Cornelius story in Acts 10 at about 20 years out, then in Acts 19 you get another visitation of the Holy Spirit with the evidence of speaking in tongues among the Ephesians, the Ephesian 12. That's 25 years out. So this is somewhere between 20 and 25 years, from Christ returning in the ascension. So when he made those statements. So the apostolic signs this far out, they haven't dissipated, they haven't certainly disappeared. But what we also see in this passage, but they do reinforce the lines of opposition. How do the signs come about? They come about because there's been pushback among some disaffected people who have disbelieved, it says in the New American Standard, verse 2. And they stir up the minds of others, Jews and non-Jews, embitter them against what Paul and Barnabas are doing. And for that reason, they decide we're going to stay. You're not rushing us off. And apparently God decides I'm going to send some signs, because they're not working this up. That's an act of God, right? And so God confirms what they're doing. The Holy Spirit confirms what they're doing by the signs that come. In fact, it says he's, on the Lord's part, he's testifying to the word of his grace. Verse 2, granting that signs and wonders be done by their hands, so that people will say, well, their words must be powerful because they're backing it up with this. This is proof. So you've got all that going on. So the signs reinforce the lines of opposition. Number 3, and the opposition grows. That, in summary, is what we're seeing happening in this part of of the book of Acts in our chapter 14. Now let's kind of look at, as I said here, the lay of the land. We see some terms, and of course they're not familiar to us. We might know American geography, but we certainly don't know ancient Near Eastern geography. So Phrygia, Lycaonia, Galatia, we see these words sprinkled throughout this part of the book of Acts. Those are all overlapping terms. Some are native terms. One, Galatia, a Roman term. But it's all basically the same area. It's in the more eastern part of what we would think of as modern-day Turkey. If you've got a Bible map, you may want to turn there and look, just to kind of orient yourself. We're not as far west as the great cities of Ephesus and the cities of the Revelation. You know, we're not over against the Aegean Sea that you cross to go into Greece and Philippi and Athens and all that. We're further to the east of that, closer to Paul's native area, which is part of modern-day Turkey as well, in that day known as Cilicia. So he's not terribly far from home, about 100 miles from home, but it's that part. It's the southern part of the middle part of modern-day Turkey. And it goes by a variety of names, some traditional, some Roman, and there you've got it. Phrygia kind of goes over into the area that includes Ephesus and Colossae and some of the churches in Revelation. It's an ancient old designation. Galatia, there was North Galatia and South Galatia. This is South Galatia. Those are Roman provinces, areas that had Roman governors over them, just like Judea and so on. So they're kind of overlapping terms. And Dr. Luke is very familiar with the geography, and he uses them. That's why he's got these lists that are some traditional terms and some, in his day, more modern terms. So just a word there. Let's talk about the population spectrum. Who are the people that live in this area? Well, in this passage, it talks about them in a way that they're talked about a lot of places. Verse number 1, Jews and Greeks. And you see that throughout the book of Acts. Dr. Luke uses that a lot, Jews and Greeks. Now, it doesn't mean just exclusively people of Israel and people from Greece proper, from Sparta, from Corinth, from Athens. It doesn't mean just that. It's a Jewish expression, they call them a Hebraism, that is a spectrum of peoples. Because in the way the Jewish people would express themselves is two opposites could include everything in between. So you've got Jews on the one hand, you've got Greeks on the other hand, very different. In fact, Paul will use those rhetorically. He'll say in Christ there's no dividing wall between Jews and Greeks. He's kind of doing the same thing there. Because he means Jews and Greeks, that's two opposite ends of the spectrum, but everything in between. So the in-between, in this case, is native people, Roman people, ethnic Greeks, non-Greeks, Jews. You got Heinz variety here. People from all over. And it's a very mobile society because of commerce and other things, persecution. And so you've got people moving, mixing. And so when he uses the phrase Jews and Greeks, it's not just exclusively sons of Abraham and Greeks. It means that, but everything in between. And when you think about it, there are a lot of things, Jewish expressions like that. There are things like heaven and earth, which includes the heavens all the way to the earth and everything in between. There's all kind of expressions like that the polar opposites, but everything in between. So that's what we've got here. So that's the people spectrum in this area. It's not one kind of people. By this time, and this is interesting, the term Greeks doesn't apply just to ethnic Greeks. it applies by this time to urban citizens in the Eastern Empire, because it's a term that's used in reference to Rome, which is in the Western Empire. So the Romans looked at Greeks as anybody in the East that lived in an urban area. That's how they thought of Greeks. And so when Paul uses that term, when Luke uses that term, it encompasses all of that too. They don't necessarily have to be ethnically Greek, you know. They don't have to be sons of Socrates to be Greeks. They don't even have to be ethnically Greek to be Greeks. And that's the sense in which it's being used here. So they're citizens of the Eastern Empire. Now, here's where it gets kind of cool. This reference to Lycaonia, that is an ancient native reference. It comes from an ancient king way back in the mystical past. We don't even know if he's a real person. We don't even know what time he actually lived. But they were founded in their mythology by a king named Lycaon. Lycaonians. Lycaon made a huge error. He was required by Zeus in their myth to provide Zeus with a dinner. And so he served this sumptuous feast of a dinner, very tasty. And it was so good that Zeus gobbled it all up. It was just wonderful, beautifully prepared, presented. Zeus loved it. And then it comes out that Lycaonia, this king, had served him up children. He had cooked children, and Zeus unknowingly had eaten children. Zeus is enraged, and he turns him, magic and all kind of things, but the upshot is he turns him into the first werewolf. This is where werewolves start. That's why the study of werewolves and the magic of werewolfism and all of that is called lycanthropy, after Lycaon, the king who got turned into a werewolf. So when Lon Chaney Jr. sees the full moon come out and Bela Lugosi says, "When the moon is full and the wolfbane blooms, the werewolf walks at night," it starts back here. It starts with this. It's a carry through. So these people in that area, several hundred years before this, about 400 years before this, had been transported rather, from what we think of as France. They're Celtic people, the same ethnic group as Irish, French. Those are Celts. And a specific grouping of the Celtic people are known as the Gallic people, Gallic, which is why this region is known as Galatia. It's the French people, what we would think of as the French people, ethnically, have populated this area. Initially as slaves, but then there was travel and different things. And that's what this region is populated with. Hence, it was called the Roman province of Galatia, because they were Gallic. Okay? Interesting, no? Now, these Gallic people, these Celtic tribes, they were thoroughgoing pagans. I mean, crazy Druid-like pagans. In fact, their religion was very Druid-like, which means it involved ritual human sacrifice. It involved having eunuch priests. Part of the worship of the truly committed was, you didn't go to the mission field if you were truly committed, self-castration. Man, you got to be a true believer. So it was a very pagan, this area, very, very pagan. This is what Paul writes the letter to the Galatians to. Maybe one day we'll do a study on Galatians. But what's very interesting is, what is the issue being dealt with in Galatians? He's established these churches, and that's what we see him doing here in Lystra, Derbe, Antioch, Iconium. This is South Galatia. And I won't go into it, but there's a whole big controversy among Bible scholars. North Galatia theory, South Galatia theory. Who is the Galatian letter written to? I believe it was, the evidence points to the South Galatia. This region is what Paul calls Galatia. And he writes this letter, and what is the issue among the Galatian Christians? They're being invaded by these people that are saying it's not enough just to embrace Christ. You've got to all be circumcised. These are former pagans now. They're not Jewish people. They're not influenced by Judaism. They're saved out of paganism. And they're now being told by people, you've got to be circumcised, you've got to follow the festivals, you've got to follow the feasts, you've got to be a Jew before you can be a Jesus follower. And Paul explodes. And no. To the point that at one point in the book of Galatians, in the Galatian letter, he says, you know, for my part, those people that are trying to persuade you to go this direction, I wish they would go all the way and just emasculate themselves. To these people whose heritage was, that was part of their worship. So his rough words really would have resounded. It's like, do what you used to do. Go back to that. Knock yourself out with that. Anyway, so these are Celtic tribes. These are Gallic people, hence Galatians. Let's talk about the religion. By this time, most of them had embraced the worship of a figure called Cybele. She is a mother goddess, and we'll just leave it at that. She's a mother goddess, like a Gaia, like an earth goddess, a mother goddess. She's the main one. She's the mother of all gods. There's also in this area, so it's kind of a strange nature worship type thing, very pagan. Again, blended in with their human sacrifice stuff from the past and the priests and all that. But there's also taken hold in this area what are known as the mystery religions. Things that come from Egypt, from India, worship of Mithras and Osiris and Isis and Horus and all these initiation rites. And that gets blended all together with Gnosticism. And it's just a mixed hodgepodge that are known as the mystery religions. Mystery because you had to be in the know to be initiated into the thing. You couldn't just attach yourself to it, almost by invitation only. And then a big rigmarole to pass muster. So this is a big area for that. This is what Paul and Barnabas are coming into. They also, the people there have the idea that the underworld is the home of divine beings. Good and bad. They come from the underworld. The gods, the divine beings. They come from under there. And also it's the home of human origin. Humans come from the underworld. And humans will return to the underworld. It's all wrapped up with the idea of burial and everything, but your eternity is under there in the underworld. That's why in this area, springs, fountains of hot water, cold water, mineral water, and there are a lot of them, really factor into their religion because those function as portals to this underworld. You got the hot and the cold. And Paul will reference some of that in some of the letters. And it really gets a big reference. We looked at it in our study of Revelation when Jesus has a message for the church at Laodicea, which is further to the west in this region. And he will say, remember, you're neither hot nor cold. I wish that you were one of the other, but since you're lukewarm, I will spit you out. You're bland. You're not hot, you're not cold. I could deal with one or the other. I can't deal with this. I can't deal with indifference. If you were a ranked sinner, I could deal with that. If you were on fire, I could deal with that. But you're neither. You're indifferent. And so I spit you out. I vomit you out. That's because of the springs and fountains, hot, cold, mineral water, all very important as a portal to all that underworld stuff. So the cult of Pluto was huge. Pluto is the god of the underworld. Hades. The cult of Pluto was huge here. Another thing that was big, they had the idea, and it was part of their native pagan religion, maybe brought from France, that there were all of these serpent mediators, all these snakes that served as mediators for you, that could plead your case, that could help you. You had to keep appeased and so on. And most especially, you appealed to them when you needed healing in your body. Do you ever wonder why the AMA, American Medical Association, symbol is this wings with two coiled serpents? It goes back to this. It goes back to this region and their idea that healing comes through serpents. And so that has become a symbol. Yeah.
I always associated that with Moses' serpent. Remember when
We can peg it back to that, yeah, because they were bitten by serpents. How do you get healing and relief from that? Well, you look on the despised thing. That's why Jesus said, like Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. If I be lifted up, what? I will draw all men unto me. He is the despised thing. Jesus is the despised thing. And if we look on him, we live. That's why we sing the song, look and live, my brother, live. Look to Jesus now and live. You look on him, the despised thing. The serpent was the despised thing. So yeah, that's kind of a theme that's very ancient Near Eastern. This idea that serpents bring healing. Counterintuitive, no, but that's what they had. But that's where that AMA symbol comes from. So all the way back to this. Let's talk about the churches in Galatia, because as I said, there is a letter written to the Galatian churches, which was not one church, it's a region, the Gallic, okay? It's actually a Roman province of some size. Take a look in 1 Corinthians 16:1. Somebody else turn to Galatians 1. And we're going to see that the churches in Galatia became fairly well known. They had some reputation even within a few years of their founding. 1 Corinthians 16:1. Who's got it? Can read it for us.
Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so you are to do as well.
So here's what we know. We know that the Corinthian Christians are familiar with the Galatian churches. Because he references, he says, I want you to do what the Galatians did. In this case, we need to take a collection and take it back to help the mother church in Jerusalem. Galatia did it. Now you need to step up, Corinthians, based on their knowledge of the Galatians. So the Galatian churches are known to the Corinthians. Take a look in Galatians itself, first chapter, verse number 7. I think that's the one I wanted, which is really not another, only there are some who are disturbing you who want to distort the gospel. I don't think that's the one I wanted. I must have mislabeled. Take a look at chapter 3, verse 1. Hopefully I got that right. It is. You foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you, before whose eyes Jesus Christ was publicly portrayed as crucified? Well, what this tells us, they're being bewitched. Troublemakers have followed Paul and Barnabas, who begin the churches, into the Galatian region with all kind of false ideas, and that's who's bewitching them. So the Galatian churches are known to troublemakers. The Galatian churches are known to the Corinthians. The Galatian churches are known to troublemakers. And that chapter 4, verse 17 kind of reinforces the same idea. They eagerly seek you, these enemies, he calls them enemies in verse 16. They eagerly seek you, not commendably, but they wish to shut you out so that you will seek them, become dependent on them. Again, they have things that you want to know, and so you have to cater to them. They're going to entrap you. But the point is that the troublemakers know all about the Galatian churches. Chapter 5, 10 through 12, same sort of thing. I have confidence in you, in the Lord, that you will adopt no other view, but the one who is disturbing you will bear his judgment, whoever it is. But I, brethren, if I still preach circumcision, why am I still persecuted? Then the stumbling block of the cross has been abolished. I wish, and here's the shocking verse, I wish that those who are troubling you would even mutilate themselves. So throw back to their ancient religion. But again, it tells us that the Galatian churches are known to the troublemakers because they follow and cause trouble. If you look in Galatians 4:13, we're told a very interesting fact. But you know that it was because of a bodily illness that I preached the gospel to you the first time. Telling us that he visited Galatia, the Galatian churches, at least twice, because he references the first time. You wouldn't say a first time if there wasn't a second time. So Paul visited at least twice, maybe more. And all of this lines up perfectly, and I bring it up really for this reason, with what's talked about in Acts 14 and Acts 16, because there you get 2 visits to Galatia. So it all lines up very nicely with what Luke records historically, our trip in chapter 14, but he returns in chapter 16. Signs play a big part in this, so let's track it down. Somebody look at Luke 9, verse 2, and Luke 10, verse 9. Because signs are what caused the opposition to harden in Iconium. Signs are what gets him stoned in Lystra. The man gets up on his feet at his command. And these are attesting miracles. These are signs that God is present. And the people do, in their own screwy way, acknowledge that. So signs very important, but where do they come from? Luke 9:2, what's it say? Who's got it? Karen, you got it?
And he sent them out to cure diseases, and he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal the sick.
There you go. Turn over just a little bit to chapter 10, verse number 9. We kind of get the similar sort of thing. What's verse 9 of 10 say?
It says, heal the sick who are there and tell them the kingdom of God has come near to you.
So these signs are present when they're in this part of the world. Why? Because Jesus commanded it. Those are Jesus' words. Heal the sick. Signs. And tell them in the kingdom. And they will believe it.
Because it's signs.
There you go. There you go. That's what I mean by they are attesting miracles. They attest to something greater than the miracle itself. That's why it was there, to point to something bigger and higher. But it's all because Jesus commanded. Now, what Paul and Barnabas are doing here with these signs, these miracles, in Iconium, then again, one is singled out in Lystra with the man with the feet, is we can think of as signs of grace. The book of Hebrews talks about signs of grace. Very interesting passage. Hebrews 2, verses 3 and 4. Somebody have it? Eldon, you got it already?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
For since the message spoke through angels was blinding, and every violation, every disobedience received its just punishment. 3.
3 and 4.
How shall we escape so great a salvation. This salvation, which was first announced by the Lord, was confirmed to us by those who heard him. God also testified to it by signs, wonders, and various miracles, and by gifts of the Holy Spirit, tribute according to his will.
There we go. So these aren't just parlor tricks. They're signs of grace. That this God that we're introducing you to, Jesus, is full of grace. Did any of them necessarily deserve a healing? No. All the guy in Lystra did is look intently at them while they're talking. And there was something in Paul that told him this guy could be healed. What's a sign of grace, of unmerited favor? That was the message that was conveyed by these different signs. That this God that we've got here, you don't need to appease him. You don't do good for him, he does good for you. And that, of course, we get it, right? They didn't get that. Was so revolutionary to them. You're telling me that I don't have to do things for the God does things for me? So they're signs of grace. Let's just wrap up our time very quickly. Just some things I think are pretty interesting. Paul's persecution. Somebody take a look at 2 Timothy 3:11. Somebody else turn to 2 Corinthians 11:23 through 28. Paul's persecution is a big part of what's going on here, what he suffers personally, and he apparently never forgets it. Take a look at what he writes to his son in the faith, Timothy, 2 Timothy 3:11. Who's got it? He will reference this suffering. Go ahead.
Well, in 10 it says, now you follow my teaching, conduct, purpose, faith, patience, love, perseverance, and then persecutions and sufferings such as happened to me in Antioch, Iconium, and at Lystra. What persecutions I endured, and out of them all the Lord rescued me.
So he didn't forget the things that he endured here, the stoning and all the rest. Take a look in 2 Corinthians 11. He gets even more pointed. 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. Somebody read that for us, please. Who's got it? Anybody? Go ahead, Carol. Yeah, go ahead.
Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more, and labors more abundant, and stripes without measure, and prisons more frequently, and deaths often. From the Jews 5 times I received 3 stripes, -1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have been in the deep. In journeys often, and perils of water, and perils of robbers, and perils of my own countrymen, and perils of the Gentiles, and perils in the city, and perils in the wilderness, and perils in the sea, and perils among false brethren. More?
That's good. Well, it's not good. That's his catalog of what he suffered. He references the stonings, the beatings, the rods, the other kind of beatings. By the way, one is Jewish and one is Roman. But he references that, the times he was shipwrecked, the animal, everything. That's his catalog. He's kind of saying, don't tell me I don't love you. Look what I went through for you kids. The point is that he was persecuted and he knew it. And he never really, it's not far from his mind. And like the 2 Timothy passage tells us, specifically what he suffered in the Galatian region. So we're definitely getting from Dr. Luke in chapter 14 an edited version. He's pulled out some notables, but certainly not all. Certainly not all. So you begin to see why he had to have a doctor travel with him, right? As I said Sunday, he got a lot of boo-boos. Let's talk about this disabled man for just a second to kind of get perspective on what's going on here. This guy who fastened his attention on them, and Paul fastened his attention back. The disabled were much abused in this society. In Roman practice, if a child was born with a disability, they were typically, by the Romans, discarded. And by others too. Because the Romans were more sophisticated than these native people would have been who had human sacrifice in their background. So they weren't kind to them either. To be disabled was not good. You would be discarded, usually discarded on a trash heap or a dung hill where they emptied the toilets. They would just throw a disabled child, infant there, and let him die. Pretty callous. So this guy is an adult, disabled in his feet at least. It tells us a couple things about his case, is that he may not have appeared lame. There's no indicator like there are in other cases where Luke talks about the lame that will be healed, notably chapter 3 with Peter. There's no indicator here that he appeared to be lame, that his legs were disfigured in some way or stunted, as in other places. Only his feet are mentioned. So it's possible that there was no disfigurement, and maybe that's what saved this one from being discarded. Or it may be that he had a very kind father. So this case is a little bit different. Again, may not have been as disfigured. But look what happens. And I wish we had more time to do this. You get in this story in 14 some of the same elements you get in the healing of the lame man in Acts 3 with Simon Peter at the beautiful gate, which we spent some time looking at too. You get the command, stand up on your feet, and you get the leaping. That's why we get the song from Acts 3, walking and leaping, and because the guy got up and he leapt and he danced all around. The parallels are kind of striking, actually, that you've got to believe Luke knows what he's doing here, and he's carefully sifted the evidence, because in both cases, they're both lame from birth. We're told that specifically. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a disease that came on later. From birth, both are lame. In both cases, there's this intense gaze from the apostle to the person. Their eyes lock on this case. In both cases, when they're healed, there's this walking and leaping that's mentioned. In fact, it says here with this one in 14 that the guy demonstrates he does have faith to be healed because he leaps up. He leaps up. Now, a little different in Acts 3, Simon Peter helps the guy up. He takes his hand. That doesn't seem to have happened here, just a voice command. But still, the leaping and the walking, both are near temple gates. Now, the one is the temple at Jerusalem. This one is a pagan temple. Zeus, where? Right outside the gate. So both are at temple gates. Both, we're told, come through faith, faith of the person. And in both cases, the crowd wants to express adulation to the agent of healing, Peter or Paul, Peter and John or Paul and Barnabas. And in both cases, that's rejected. Peter shuts it down, John shuts it down, these guys shut it down. No. More dramatically with these guys than with Peter, but still, you still get, so there's so many parallels there. But I wonder if we aren't going back to Isaiah 35:6. Somebody look there for us. And then Dr. Luke, in his gospel, does seem to be referencing 35:6 of Isaiah in chapter 7, verse 22. But just for tonight, 35:6 of Isaiah. Who's got that? You can almost think of it as a fulfillment or an expectation that comes to pass here. Who's got Isaiah? Go ahead.
And the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the dumb sing. For waters shall burst forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert.
beautiful phrases all, Streams in the Desert. That's a great devotional book. But 35:6 of Isaiah tells us we should anticipate the presence of the Messiah will cause leaping on the part of the lame who aren't supposed to leap. But again, in this case, we see it, so we know who's at work there. There's another kind of point of interest is this line in these people's thinking between deity, the divine, and the mortal. For these people, it's fairly thin. That's why it's not hard for them to say, the gods have come down to us as men. Because they didn't see this could happen. There are stories that they talked about in their mythology where it happened. But take a look in Acts chapter 10, Acts chapter 12, Acts chapter 28. It happened all the time. 10:25 of Acts, what's it say? And it's a story we know well. Paul goes into Cornelius' house, the Roman, the Italian, who's a transplant to the Caesarea area of Israel. He's a God-fearer. And as soon as Peter goes into his home, what's the reaction? Cornelius, this refined man, falls at Simon Peter's feet to worship him. And Simon Peter has to say, no. Get up. Take a look in 12:22, a couple pages over. There's another case where the line between, in their thinking, between divine and mortal, pretty thin line. What's 12:22 tell us?
They shouted, "This is the voice of God, not of man."
Yeah, this is wicked old puppet King Herod. Makes a big speech, a stem winder, and he's dressed in magnificence. Josephus says that on this, and Josephus talks about this too, outside of our scriptures. He talks about this incident where he is struck dead. He ends up being eaten from the inside out by worms, in his intestines. But he is, Josephus says, is dressed in absolute splendor in this metallic robe and crown, tiara type thing. So, and he's timed it, Josephus says, so that the sun hits him just right, and it's just dazzling. And then his words to these people that are on the receiving end of his largesse, he's the one who enables them to eat, and so they're just sucking up to him, and they respond the words of a God and not a man. And he accepts it. Unlike Paul, Barnabas, Simon Peter, John, he accepts it, and he's struck dead for it. So, but again, this thought that a man, a human, could be a god, the line is very, very thin. One more, 28:6. Last chapter of the book of Acts. What's it tell us? What do you got, Karen?
The people expected him to swell up and suddenly fall dead, but after waiting a long time and seeing nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their minds and said he is a god.
This is Paul on the island of Malta, shipwrecked. They get out, build a fire. Paul's helping to build the fire, throws in a bundle of sticks. Snake, viper, comes out, locks on him, and the people just assume he's going to drop over dead. He's been bitten by this thing. He's going to die. He doesn't die. He just shakes it off in the fire and goes on. Maybe because of Mark 16, right? Snakes won't hurt you. And so Paul goes on about his business, and they are dumbfounded. And they say, he has survived this, he must be a god. Now, in Malta, they had a legend, a myth about a character, a god in disguise, who comes and they realize he's a god when he's bitten by a snake and doesn't die. So when they see this happen to Paul, they say, must be a god. But again, it points out what we're finding here in Galatians, in the Galatian region, the words of gods and not men, the gods have come down to us, that line is really thin in the ancient world. Again, this is one of those cases where we have to think like they do, right? There are cases, Galatians 4:14, where Paul is thought of as an angel, as a divine being, and he references it himself, and I think it's a little tongue-in-cheek. He's writing back to the Galatians, the people in this region, where some of the people, he had gotten stoned for some of the people saying, you must be a god, and then they're disabused of that, and they're so disappointed, they're persuaded to kill him. We formerly thought he was a god, he can't be that, so we'll kill him. And Paul writes back in the book of Galatians 4:14, and he says to the Galatian Christians, you treated me like I was an angel. I think he's being a little sarcastic there, because being treated like he was divine didn't really get him anywhere. And as I said, he never forgets what happened in that region. So the whole idea of disguised deities, that was a theme in the ancient world, but in spades in this particular area. There were lots of myths, lots of legends. Just one very quickly was a legend about two characters named Bacchus and Philemon. It's an ancient Phrygian from this area myth. Zeus and Hermes come down to earth in disguise. People don't know they're gods, similar to what happens here. They come down to earth in this myth. People don't know. They come down to the Phrygian people, the people in this area. And the only two people that respond with anything like hospitality are Bacchus and Philemon. Philemon was a common name. We get one of our books is named after Philemon, different Philemon. But these two are the only ones that receive them with hospitality. And so Zeus and Hermes, they kill everybody else with a flood. So there was this ancient myth of disguised gods. So when Paul and Barnabas come on the scene, not unusual. There's an ancient author, poet, writer named Ovid. You may have heard of Ovid. Writes love poems, but also writes a series of disguised god stories called the Metamorphosis. Metamorphosis, to change shape. And it's about these shape-shifting characters that are gods come to earth. And among the stories that he tells is a reworking of the Bacchus and Philemon, but there are a score of others where the gods show up in different forms and fashions among men, unaware, in disguise. So this is kind of a theme for this area. And it's older than the time of Ovid, who's writing shortly before Christ comes on the scene. Acts 28:11, we'll end with this. There's a famous one, and you probably read it and didn't realize what you were looking at. But you're looking at a reference to disguised gods. It's in Acts 28:11. It involves the ship that brings Paul on his final leg from Malta, snake, all the way up to the port nearest Rome. He takes a ship. Well, I'll let you read it. 28:11 of Acts. And different Bibles say it differently. Some of them name the two characters. Some of them just call them the twins.
3 months we put out to sea in a ship that we had wintered in the island. It was the Alexandrian ship with the figurehead of the twin gods Castor and Pollux.
There we go. It was from Alexandria, which is North Africa, which is Egypt. That's where it hailed from. But this ship that they take for the last leg, it's got the images under the bow of Castor and Pollux, these twin brothers that in Greek mythology were these twins that I get fascinated by this stuff, but just cut to the chase. They please the gods very much, to the point that one of them dies and the other one says, I don't want to be without him, let me die too. But the gods don't want them both to die and stay in the underworld, so they make a deal with them. You can spend a little bit of time in the underworld every once in a while, but you can spend most of your time on Olympus, Castor and Pollux. So that reference right there is to these disguised gods. Later on, these gods, they're elevated to God status because they're allowed to be on Olympus. And later on, they become a constellation. Remember the stars? The stars are these divine beings. It all is of a piece. But we know that constellation is Gemini. That's Castor and Pollux, the twins. Elevated to godship, Gemini, the twins. So we'll stop there. I hope you guys find this stuff as fascinating as I do. I could talk a lot longer. We've been long enough. We're a few minutes over. So for those that have joined us online, thank you very much. Too bad for you. You didn't get a study guide. You won't get the bonus round, but we will see you next time.